Marine Corporal Sarah Martinez never imagined that her routine patrol through the dusty streets of Fallujah would become a fight for survival that would test every limit of human endurance. The 24-year-old communications specialist from Phoenix, Arizona, had been deployed to Iraq for 8 months, serving with the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines during the intense urban warfare of 2004. The sun barely peeked over the concrete barriers when Sarah's squad received orders to investigate reports of insurgent activity in the eastern district of the city. Intelligence suggested that enemy fighters had been using abandoned buildings to stage attacks on coalition forces. What seemed like another standard reconnaissance mission would soon transform into a nightmare that would haunt the streets of Fallujah for days. Sarah checked her radio equipment one final time as her squad of 12 Marines prepared to move out from forward operating base Courage. The weight of her gear felt familiar now after months of operations, but something felt different about this morning. The usual chatter among the Marines was subdued, and even Sergeant Rodriguez, known for his jokes before dangerous missions, remained unusually quiet as he reviewed the mission briefings. The convoy rolled through the checkpoint at 0630 hours, with Sarah's vehicle positioned third in the line of 4 armored Humvees. Through her headset, she monitored multiple radio frequencies, coordinating with base command and other units operating in the area. The streets appeared empty, which in Fallujah often meant trouble was brewing somewhere nearby. As they approached the target building, a 3-story concrete structure that had once housed a small textile factory, Sarah noticed movement in the upper windows. She immediately radioed the observation to her squad leader, Staff Sergeant Thompson, who ordered the convoy to halt while they assessed the situation. The building stood at the intersection of 2 main roads, providing whoever was inside with clear sight lines in multiple directions. Thompson made the decision to approach the building on foot, leaving 2 Marines with each vehicle, while the rest advanced to clear the structure. Sarah volunteered to accompany the assault team, bringing her radio to maintain communication with base command and nearby units. Her training had prepared her for combat situations, but nothing could have prepared her for what awaited inside those walls. The first explosion came without warning. As the Marines approached the main entrance, an improvised explosive device hidden beneath loose rubble detonated with devastating force. The blast threw Sarah against a concrete wall, temporarily stunning her and filling the air with dust and debris. Through the ringing in her ears, she could hear the distinctive crack of AK-47 fire erupting from multiple positions around the building. Sarah quickly assessed her condition as training took over. Her left shoulder ached from the impact with the wall, but she could still move her arms and legs. Her radio had been damaged in the explosion, but she managed to switch to her backup unit and immediately called for support from base command. The sound of incoming rounds striking concrete near her position forced her to seek better cover behind a large piece of debris. The firefight intensified as more insurgent fighters revealed their positions throughout the building complex. Sarah counted at least 8 different muzzle flashes from various windows and doorways, indicating that her squad had walked into a carefully planned ambush. The enemy had chosen their ground well, using the multi-story building to create overlapping fields of fire that made it extremely difficult for the Marines to advance or retreat safely. Staff Sergeant Thompson's voice crackled over the radio, reporting that 3 Marines had been wounded in the initial explosion and that they were pinned down in the courtyard area. Sarah could see the injured Marines from her position, but reaching them would require crossing an open area that was being swept by enemy fire. She knew that without immediate medical attention, at least one of the wounded might not survive. Sarah made a decision that would define the next 48 hours of her life. Despite the intense enemy fire, she began moving toward the wounded Marines, using whatever cover she could find among the rubble and abandoned vehicles scattered throughout the area. Her medical training, though limited compared to a Navy corpsman, might be enough to stabilize the injured until proper help could arrive. The first bullet struck her right leg as she sprinted between 2 concrete barriers. The impact spun her around and sent her tumbling behind a destroyed car, but Sarah forced herself to keep moving. Adrenaline masked much of the pain as she continued toward her fellow Marines, determined not to let them die in that courtyard while she remained in safety. She reached the first wounded Marine, Lance Corporal Williams, who had taken shrapnel in his chest and was struggling to breathe. Sarah quickly applied pressure to the wounds while scanning for the next threat. The enemy fighters had adjusted their positions, and were now directing concentrated fire toward the courtyard, clearly recognizing that the Marines were attempting to evacuate their wounded. The second bullet found its mark, as Sarah worked to drag Williams to better cover. This round struck her in the left arm, causing her to momentarily lose her grip on the injured Marine. Blood began seeping through her uniform, but she gritted her teeth and continued the evacuation. Williams was semi-conscious but alive, and Sarah knew that getting him out of the kill zone was his only chance for survival. As she positioned Williams behind a concrete wall that offered protection from most angles, Sarah noticed that the enemy fire was becoming more organized and precise. The insurgents were clearly experienced fighters who understood urban warfare tactics. They had divided into teams that could provide covering fire for each other while maintaining pressure on the trapped Marines. Sarah's radio crackled with updates from base command. Reinforcements were en route, but it would take at least 20 minutes for them to reach the location due to other ongoing operations in the city. 20 minutes felt like an eternity as bullets continued to crack overhead and impact the concrete around their position. She knew that her squad needed to either fight their way out or find a way to hold their ground until help arrived. The third and fourth bullets struck Sarah almost simultaneously as she moved to help the second wounded Marine. One round caught her in the right shoulder, while another grazed her neck, leaving a burning sensation and the warm feeling of blood running down her collar. The pain was becoming harder to ignore, but Sarah pushed through it, knowing that stopping now meant death for herself and possibly her fellow Marines. She reached Corporal Jackson, who had been knocked unconscious by the initial explosion and had multiple fragment wounds across his back and legs. Sarah checked his pulse and breathing before beginning to drag him toward the relative safety where Williams lay. The enemy fire seemed to follow her movements, with rounds striking the ground just inches from her position as she struggled with Jackson's dead weight. The fifth bullet struck her lower back as she pulled Jackson behind cover. This impact was different from the others, sending a sharp, electric pain down her legs that momentarily caused them to buckle. Sarah realized that this wound might be more serious than the others, but she forced herself to continue working on Jackson's injuries while keeping pressure on her own wounds when possible. Through her damaged radio, Sarah could hear the voices of other Marines calling for situation reports and coordinating their positions. Staff Sergeant Thompson was attempting to organize a counterattack that would allow them to either eliminate the enemy threat or create enough suppression to evacuate the wounded. However, the insurgents' superior positioning made any aggressive action extremely risky. Sarah managed to establish radio contact with a nearby Army unit that was conducting operations 2 blocks away. She provided detailed information about the enemy positions and the number of wounded Marines, requesting immediate assistance. The Army commander promised to divert resources to help, but warned that they were also engaged with enemy forces and might face delays. As the firefight entered its second hour, Sarah noticed that her vision was becoming somewhat blurry, and she was having difficulty maintaining focus on complex tasks. Blood loss from multiple wounds was beginning to affect her performance, but she continued to monitor the radio and provide first aid to the wounded Marines. She knew that showing weakness might demoralize the other squad members who were counting on her communication skills to coordinate their rescue. The sixth and seventh bullets struck Sarah within seconds of each other as enemy fighters launched a coordinated assault on their position. One round hit her left leg, while another struck her right side, causing her to double over in pain. These new wounds, combined with the blood loss from her previous injuries, pushed Sarah to the edge of consciousness. She fought to remain alert, knowing that losing consciousness now could mean death for everyone. Despite her deteriorating condition, Sarah continued to call for reinforcements and provide tactical updates to incoming friendly forces. Her voice grew weaker with each radio transmission, but she maintained professional communication protocols that allowed other units to understand the severity of their situation. The wounded Marines were stable but needed immediate evacuation, and the enemy force was estimated at 15 to 20 fighters with automatic weapons and explosives. The sound of helicopter rotors in the distance provided a moment of hope, but Sarah's radio soon crackled with disappointing news. The medical evacuation helicopter was taking heavy fire from other parts of the city and could not safely land in their area. The crew promised to return as soon as the airspace was secure, but that might take hours depending on the overall tactical situation. Sarah realized that her squad might be trapped in this position for much longer than anyone had anticipated, Her ammunition was running low, her wounds were becoming more serious with each passing minute, and the enemy showed no signs of retreating or reducing their aggressive tactics. She began preparing for the possibility that they might need to hold this position through the night, which would require careful management of their remaining resources and medical supplies. The afternoon sun blazed mercilessly overhead as Sarah Martinez fought to maintain consciousness in the rubble-strewn courtyard of Fallujah. 7 bullet wounds had turned her uniform dark with blood, but her determination to save her fellow Marines burned stronger than the pain coursing through her body. The 8th bullet would come during the enemy's most desperate assault yet. As the hours dragged on, the insurgents changed their tactics. Instead of maintaining steady suppressive fire, they began launching coordinated rushes from different angles, attempting to overrun the Marines' defensive position. Sarah watched through her rifle scope as groups of fighters moved between buildings, clearly planning a multi-directional attack that would be difficult to repel with their limited ammunition and wounded personnel. The first wave came from the north, with 4 insurgents sprinting across the open ground, while their companions provided covering fire from the upper floors of the textile factory. Sarah managed to drop one of the attackers with a well-placed shot before enemy return fire forced her back into cover. Staff Sergeant Thompson and 2 other Marines engaged the remaining attackers, successfully driving them back but expending precious ammunition in the process. During the brief lull that followed the failed assault, Sarah attempted to contact Base Command with an updated casualty report and ammunition status. Her radio was barely functional after taking shrapnel damage, and she had to repeat her transmissions multiple times before receiving acknowledgement. The news from base was not encouraging. Multiple units throughout Fallujah were engaged in heavy fighting, and reinforcements were still at least an hour away. Sarah checked on Lance Corporal Williams and Corporal Jackson, both of whom remained unconscious but stable. Her basic medical training allowed her to monitor their vital signs and adjust bandages when necessary. But she knew they needed proper medical attention soon. Blood loss and potential internal injuries made their conditions increasingly precarious with each passing hour. The second enemy assault came from 2 directions simultaneously. As Sarah repositioned to engage targets approaching from the east, the 8th bullet struck her in the left chest, spinning her around and dropping her to the ground. The impact felt different from the previous wounds, creating a deep, burning sensation that made breathing difficult and painful. Sarah struggled to her feet, fighting waves of dizziness and nausea that threatened to overwhelm her. She could taste blood in her mouth and feel a wetness spreading across her chest that suggested this wound might be more serious than the others. Nevertheless, she continued to return fire at the advancing insurgents, helping to break up their coordinated attack before they could reach the wounded Marines. Staff Sergeant Thompson crawled over to check on Sarah's condition during the next lull in fighting. His experienced eyes immediately recognized the severity of her chest wound, and he began applying a pressure bandage while scanning for incoming threats. Thompson quietly told Sarah that she needed to focus on staying conscious and maintaining radio communication while the rest of the squad handled the defensive fighting. The afternoon heat became almost unbearable as Sarah lay behind the concrete barrier, struggling to maintain focus on the radio frequencies. Dehydration compounded her blood loss, creating a dangerous combination that threatened to shut down her body's systems. She rationed her water carefully, knowing that the other Marines also needed to conserve fluids in the brutal desert climate. Enemy sniper fire began targeting their position with increasing accuracy as the insurgents brought in more experienced fighters to break the deadlock. Sarah could hear the distinctive crack of high-powered rifle rounds impacting near their hiding spots, forcing the Marines to keep their heads down and limiting their ability to return effective fire. The snipers were clearly targeting anyone who attempted to move between positions or provide aid to the wounded. As evening approached, Sarah noticed that the enemy was bringing up additional weapons and personnel. Through her binoculars, she counted at least 25 insurgent fighters now surrounding their position, some armed with rocket-propelled grenades that could easily destroy their improvised fortifications. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and Sarah began to doubt whether they would survive until reinforcements arrived. The 9th bullet found Sarah as she attempted to adjust her radio antenna for better communication with Base Command. The round struck her right shoulder, destroying muscle and nerve tissue that left her right arm virtually useless. The impact was so forceful that it knocked her radio from her hands, sending it sliding across the courtyard where she could not safely retrieve it. Working with her left hand, Sarah managed to activate her backup radio and establish weak contact with a reconnaissance drone operating in the area. The drone operator confirmed that enemy forces were massing for what appeared to be a final assault on their position. Friendly reinforcements were still 30 minutes away, but the enemy clearly intended to overrun the Marine position before help could arrive. Sarah shared this intelligence with Staff Sergeant Thompson, who began redistributing their remaining ammunition and preparing defensive positions for the expected attack. Each Marine had fewer than 50 rounds remaining, barely enough for one sustained firefight. Thompson made the difficult decision to have Sarah focus entirely on communication, while the other able-bodied Marines prepared to repel the assault. The insurgents began their final coordinated attack just as the sun started to set, using the changing light conditions to mask their movements. Sarah could see muzzle flashes erupting from multiple positions as enemy fighters advanced from 3 directions simultaneously. The volume of incoming fire was unlike anything she had experienced during her deployment, with bullets striking their position in a nearly constant stream. During the height of the assault, the 10th bullet struck Sarah in the abdomen, causing her to double over in agony. This wound felt different from the others, creating a deep, throbbing pain that seemed to radiate throughout her entire body. Sarah realized that she might have sustained internal injuries that would prove fatal without immediate surgery, but she continued to coordinate radio communications despite her deteriorating condition. Staff Sergeant Thompson and the remaining Marines fought desperately to hold their positions as insurgent fighters closed to within 50 meters of their defensive line. Sarah could hear the distinctive sound of AK-47 fire mixing with the deeper reports of Marine M4 carbines as the firefight reached its climax. Smoke from exploding grenades filled the courtyard, making it difficult to see targets or coordinate defensive fire. Through her failing radio, Sarah managed to establish contact with an AC-130 gunship that was orbiting the city in support of other operations. She provided detailed coordinates for the enemy positions, while struggling to remain conscious long enough to guide the aircraft's devastating firepower onto the insurgent fighters. The gunship crew acknowledged her transmissions and requested confirmation of friendly positions before engaging. The aircraft's 25mm cannon fire began impacting the insurgent positions with devastating effect, forcing the enemy fighters to abandon their assault and seek cover in the surrounding buildings. Sarah watched through blurred vision as the precision strikes eliminated multiple enemy positions, while carefully avoiding the area where her squad had taken refuge. The immediate threat was neutralized, but Sarah knew her own condition was becoming critical. As the gunship continued to patrol overhead, providing security for the trapped Marines, Sarah felt her strength ebbing away with each labored breath. The combination of blood loss, dehydration, and multiple traumatic injuries was pushing her body beyond its limits. She struggled to maintain radio contact with the incoming relief force, knowing that her communication skills might be the difference between successful evacuation and continued entrapment. The 11th and final bullet struck Sarah as insurgent snipers attempted one last effort to eliminate the Marine communications specialist. The round hit her in the upper leg, shattering bone and causing massive tissue damage that left her unable to move her lower body. Sarah felt consciousness slipping away as shock and blood loss finally overcame her determination to continue fighting. Staff Sergeant Thompson immediately moved to provide first aid for Sarah's latest wound, but her condition was clearly becoming desperate. Multiple traumatic injuries, severe blood loss, and signs of internal bleeding indicated that she needed immediate surgical intervention to survive. Thompson called for emergency medical evacuation while continuing to monitor for additional enemy activity in the area. As darkness fell over Fallujah, Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness while the remaining Marines maintained their defensive positions. Through the haze of pain and medication from her first aid kit, she could hear the distant sound of helicopters approaching their location. The relief force was finally arriving, but Sarah's fight for survival was far from over. The medical evacuation helicopter touched down in a nearby clearing, while Marine reinforcements secured the landing zone and established a defensive perimeter. Navy corpsmen quickly assessed the wounded Marines and began preparing them for immediate transport to the nearest field hospital. Sarah's injuries were among the most severe the medical personnel had encountered during their deployment. As the helicopter lifted off with its cargo of wounded Marines, Sarah caught a glimpse of the devastated courtyard, where they had fought for their lives. The concrete walls were pockmarked with bullet holes, and debris from explosions littered the area where they had made their desperate stand. She realized that her survival depended entirely on the skill of the medical team racing to save her life. The flight to the field hospital took only minutes, but Sarah's condition continued to deteriorate during the journey. Medical personnel worked frantically to stabilize her vital signs while maintaining pressure on her multiple wounds. Blood transfusions were started immediately, and powerful medications were administered to combat shock and prevent organ failure. Upon arrival at the hospital, Sarah was rushed into emergency surgery, where a team of military surgeons worked through the night to repair the massive damage to her body. 11 bullet wounds had caused trauma to multiple organ systems, requiring complex procedures to stop internal bleeding and reconstruct damaged tissues. The surgical team later described her case as one of the most challenging they had encountered during their deployment to Iraq. 2 days after the devastating firefight in eastern Fallujah, Marine Corporal Sarah Martinez remained missing in action according to official military records. What the command structure did not know was that Sarah had regained consciousness in an abandoned building 3 blocks from the original battle site, wounded but alive, continuing her fight for survival in the heart of enemy territory. The confusion began during the chaotic medical evacuation when insurgent mortar fire struck near the helicopter landing zone. In the scramble to evacuate casualties under fire, Sarah had been accidentally separated from her squad during the movement to the aircraft. Semi-conscious and severely wounded, she had crawled into a destroyed storefront, seeking shelter from the incoming artillery, where she would remain hidden for the next 48 hours. Navy SEAL Team 5 had been tasked with conducting reconnaissance operations in Fallujah when they received reports of a missing Marine with critical intelligence about insurgent positions. The team, led by Senior Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez, was already operating deep in enemy territory when they volunteered to search for the missing communications specialist. Their mission expanded to include both intelligence gathering and personnel recovery. Sarah's situation during those 2 days tested every survival skill she had learned during Marine Corps training. Her 11 gunshot wounds continued bleeding intermittently, and she had no access to medical supplies beyond a small first aid kit that had survived the firefight. Dehydration became her most immediate threat, as temperatures soared above 115 degrees Fahrenheit in the abandoned building where she sought refuge. The building Sarah had chosen for shelter was a former electronics shop that had been damaged by previous fighting in the area. Broken glass and debris covered the floor, but the structure provided concealment from enemy patrols that regularly moved through the neighborhood. Sarah positioned herself in a back room where she could observe the street through a hole in the wall, while remaining hidden from casual observation. During her first night alone, Sarah heard insurgent fighters moving through the area, searching buildings and calling to each other in Arabic. She remained motionless for hours at a time, fighting waves of pain and dizziness while enemy personnel passed within meters of her hiding place. Her military training in escape and evasion proved invaluable, as she avoided detection despite her severely compromised physical condition. Sarah's radio equipment had been damaged beyond repair during the firefight, leaving her with no way to contact friendly forces or signal for help. She improvised signaling devices using reflective materials from the electronics shop, hoping to catch the attention of coalition aircraft during their reconnaissance flights over the city. However, the urban environment and ongoing combat operations made it difficult for aircrews to spot individual survivors. The SEAL team began their search by retracing the route Sarah's squad had taken during the original patrol. Senior Chief Rodriguez and his team members carefully examined the battle site, looking for clues about what direction the missing Marine might have traveled after becoming separated from her unit. Blood trails and equipment fragments provided limited information about her possible whereabouts. Sarah spent her second day fighting infection and fever that developed from her untreated wounds. Without proper medical care, several of her injuries had become infected, causing her body temperature to rise dangerously high. She used water from a broken pipe in the building to clean her wounds as best she could, but the risk of serious complications increased with each passing hour. The insurgent presence in the area made Sarah's situation even more precarious. Enemy fighters had established observation posts in several nearby buildings, and she could hear them communicating about coalition force movements throughout the neighborhood. Sarah realized that any attempt to move from her hiding place during daylight hours would likely result in capture or death. Senior Chief Rodriguez decided to expand the search pattern after finding minimal evidence at the original firefight location. The SEAL team divided into two-man elements to cover more ground while maintaining the ability to provide mutual support if they encountered enemy forces. Each team carried advanced night vision equipment and satellite communication devices to coordinate their search efforts. Sarah's physical condition deteriorated significantly during her second night in hiding. Blood loss and dehydration had weakened her to the point where she struggled to remain conscious for extended periods. She rationed her small water supply carefully, knowing that dehydration would kill her faster than her gunshot wounds if she did not find help soon. The sounds of nearby combat operations provided both hope and concern for Sarah as she listened to firefights erupting throughout the city. While the presence of friendly forces meant potential rescue, the intensity of the fighting indicated that the tactical situation remained dangerous for any rescue operation. Sarah prepared herself mentally for the possibility that she might not be found in time. On the afternoon of the second day, SEAL Petty Officer First Class David Chen noticed unusual disturbances in the dust and debris near the electronics shop where Sarah was hiding. His experience in tracking and reconnaissance allowed him to identify signs that someone had recently moved through the area, despite efforts to conceal their passage. Chen signaled for his teammate to investigate, while he provided overwatch. Sarah heard movement outside her building and initially assumed it was another insurgent patrol. She remained motionless in her concealment, fighting the urge to look outside despite her curiosity about the approaching footsteps. Her survival instincts told her to remain hidden until she could positively identify whoever was searching the area. The distinctive sound of American military equipment caught Sarah's attention as the SEAL team moved closer to her position. She recognized the familiar noise of tactical gear and boots that differed significantly from the sandals and loose clothing worn by insurgent fighters. Hope began to replace despair as Sarah realized that friendly forces might finally be searching for her. Petty Officer Chen entered the electronics shop cautiously, using hand signals to communicate with his teammate while scanning for threats or signs of recent occupation. His training in close-quarters combat and building clearing allowed him to methodically search each room without exposing himself to potential ambush. Chen's experience told him that someone had been using this building recently. Sarah heard the searcher approaching her hiding place and made the critical decision to reveal herself before being discovered. She called out softly in English, identifying herself as a United States Marine and requesting immediate assistance. Her voice was weak from dehydration and blood loss, but clearly recognizable as an American service member in distress. Chen immediately responded to Sarah's identification, following proper challenge and password procedures to confirm her identity before approaching her position. When he saw the extent of her injuries and the conditions she had endured for 2 days, Chen was amazed that she had remained conscious and alert. He immediately called for medical support while beginning first aid procedures. The SEAL medic, Petty Officer Second Class Robert Torres, arrived within minutes and began comprehensive treatment of Sarah's multiple gunshot wounds. Torres had extensive experience treating combat casualties, but Sarah's case was remarkable for the number of injuries she had sustained and her ability to survive without medical attention. He started intravenous fluids and administered pain medication while preparing her for evacuation. Sarah's first words to her rescuers were questions about the status of her fellow Marines who had been wounded in the original firefight. Even after 2 days of fighting for her own survival, her primary concern remained the welfare of her squad members. Senior Chief Rodriguez assured her that all other Marines had been successfully evacuated and were receiving proper medical care. The extraction of Sarah from her hiding place required careful coordination to avoid detection by insurgent forces still operating in the area. The SEAL team established security around the building, while Torres continued treating her injuries and preparing her for movement. Sarah's condition was stable enough for transport, but she would need immediate surgery once they reached friendly medical facilities. Sarah insisted on walking to the extraction point, despite her severe injuries and the SEAL team's offers to carry her. Her determination impressed the Special Operations personnel, who recognized the mental toughness required to survive alone in enemy territory for 2 days with 11 gunshot wounds. Sarah's fighting spirit had sustained her through conditions that would have defeated most people. The helicopter extraction took place under cover of darkness, with attack aircraft providing security for the medical evacuation flight. Sarah remained conscious throughout the flight, continuing to provide intelligence information about insurgent activities she had observed during her time in hiding. Her professional dedication to her mission responsibilities impressed the SEAL team members who had rescued her. Upon arrival at the field hospital, Sarah was immediately rushed into surgery, where the same team that had treated her squad members worked to address complications from her untreated wounds. The surgeons were amazed by her condition, noting that most patients with similar injuries would not have survived 2 days without proper medical care. Sarah's survival was attributed to her physical fitness, mental toughness, and basic medical knowledge. The story of Sarah Martinez's survival became legendary within military circles, serving as an example of the courage and determination displayed by American service members under extreme conditions. Her ability to evade enemy capture while fighting off infection and blood loss demonstrated the effectiveness of military training and the power of human will to survive against overwhelming odds. Senior Chief Rodriguez later recommended Sarah for the Purple Heart and Bronze Star for her actions during the firefight and her survival in enemy territory. The SEAL team members who rescued her described finding Sarah as one of the most rewarding missions of their deployment, proving that no American service member would be left behind regardless of the risks involved. Sarah's recovery required months of rehabilitation and multiple surgeries to repair the damage from her 11 gunshot wounds. However, her survival and eventual return to active duty inspired countless other service members and demonstrated the resilience of the human spirit when faced with seemingly impossible circumstances. Her story became a testament to the motto that Marines never leave their own behind. The intelligence information Sarah provided during her rescue proved valuable for subsequent operations in Fallujah, helping other units avoid similar ambushes and locate insurgent strongholds throughout the city. Her professional competence under extreme stress contributed to the safety of numerous other coalition forces operating in the area during the remainder of the deployment. Years later, Sarah Martinez would retire from the Marine Corps with full honors, carrying the scars of her service but proud of her contribution to the mission and her fellow Marines. Her story of survival against impossible odds continues to inspire new generations of military personnel and serves as a reminder of the extraordinary courage displayed by ordinary people when circumstances demand extraordinary sacrifice.